Even if you never render video, Forest Pack's animation controls are still really useful. In this tips and tricks episode, we'll look at how you can use these tools to reseed other parametric modeling plugins, like GrowFX, to create tree and plant variations without having to store and maintain many source objects in your scene. In fact, in our example, we've used only one stone, one tree, two ferns, and two ground cover patch objects. We start with a scene that already contains all of the Forest Pack Pro objects you need, but no randomization has yet been applied. In this tutorial, we'll look at how to sample the source objects to get different meshes, and then add some further randomization using the transform controls. You can see in the before image that all of the trees, ferns, and ground cover plants clearly use the same model. But by the end of the tutorial, this kind of visible repetition is considerably more difficult to spot. So the principle is actually very straightforward. Forest Pack's animation controls allow you to sample geometry at regular points along the timeline. Ordinarily, we use this to create animations that are offset in time to create variety, and you can read more about this in our Animating with Forest Pack tutorial. But, as well as scattering animated models, we can also use this tool to sample single static models from different points in time and scatter them to create variations in geometry for still images. Couple this with other parametric modeling tools that have an animatable seed value, and we're able to create completely different models on each frame. For example, in the sample scene we have a stone object. It's been created parametrically using displacement maps and noise modifiers, both of which are animated so that each frame creates a differently shaped rock. So all we need to do is add this to a Forest Pack object and edit some of the animation settings to scatter some samples of this object. So I'm going to get started by selecting the Forest Pack Rock Patch object. This is a small sample area, and display has been set to mesh so that we can better see the outcomes of these changes. At the moment, the same rock is obviously repeated. To add greater variety, let's grab some rocks from the timeline. Go to the animation rollout, and here you'll see 4 animation modes. The first of these, Follow Geometry, is used when you want all the items to stay in sync, so it's really no use for our purposes today. At Random from Map chooses a sample point based on a grayscale texture, and it may be useful too, but random samples is what we're after. It enables you to define set sample points and then randomize them at the start of the scatter. And to do this, it has 2 parameters, time offset and count. The time offset value determines the number of frames between samples starting from frame 0. For example, if I set this value to 2, I'll get samples from frames 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 and so on. In tandem with this, the count parameter defines the total number of samples. In this example, that would equate to the total number of different rock variations that I want to create. So if you gradually increase the count value, you'll see that more rock variations get added to the scatter. In this example, I think 10 rocks is going to be enough. It's important to note that the number of samples in the cache is the number of objects in the items list multiplied by the count value. So for example, if I had 3 animated rock items in the items list and I had a count value of 10, I'd actually have cached 30 rocks for Forest Pack to scatter. It's something to be aware of because the larger the cache, the more memory you're using. So this is looking much better already, but for even greater variety, we can also randomize the transforms. To do this, open the Transforms rollout where you'll find controls to randomize the translation, rotation and scale of objects. Turn on the checkboxes for rotation and scale and leave the minimum and maximum values at their default. They work well for many purposes. And finally, to add further variety, you can subtly randomize the tint color and textures using Forest Color. You can find out more about this powerful map in our Autumn Parks tutorial. If you render the final rocks, they'll look like this. And remember, this is still from one single object in the scene. So that's the basic principle. Now let's look at another example, this time with nested Forest Pack objects. When you create or purchase individual plants, in order to keep the number of scattered items to a minimum, it's often necessary to combine them into larger patches to cover large areas. For even greater variety and more realistic results, you'd expect to create multiple patches so that visible repetition isn't too obvious. In the included scene, there were already 2 patches for the ground cover, one of leaf mulch and another of the leaves combined with a bugle flower. Let's go back to our before render and see how these look in the scene using only a single patch. Not bad, but you can see that the distribution of the flowers appears very regular and the repetition is quite obvious. So let's fix that. Select the creeper patch and turn on auto key. I'm going to move the playhead to frame 100 And then in the Forest Pack Objects General Rollout, enter a new seed value. To see what we've done, just scrub the timeline and you'll see that just like the rocks, we now get a new random version for each frame. Just to note that to change the ratio of the plants in the patch, you can adjust the probability of items in the geometry rollout. By editing these, you can get some different effects. I've set them up deliberately so that some of the patches will not have flowers and some will only have creepers, to give me more variety in the scattered patches. So now we need to do the same thing for the leaves patch. So select it and turn on auto key again. Move the playhead to frame 100. And in the Forest Pack Objects General Rollout, enter a new seed value. So now we have two patches, each with a different version on each frame. These are then nested inside a third Forest Pack object, which is used to scatter them on the terrain. We now need to turn on this Forest Pack Object's animation controls and set them up to sample random frames from the patches we just created. So select Forest Pack Ground Cover, go to the Animation menu, and check Random Samples. Set time offset to 1 and count to 10. Remembering there are two patches used here, so we're actually creating 20 samples of the ground cover object. And finally, to add some more variation, go to the Transform rollout and enable rotation. The default settings are fine. And scale randomization as well. This time change the minimum value to 100 and the maximum value to 110% so that the scale effect is more subtle. And with the randomization applied, repetition is much less obvious and the changes in flower intensity are more believable. It may be hard to see at this distance, so we can also see a close-up. The great thing about this technique is that it works with nearly any parametric tool. For example, we can also use it with GrowFX to scatter many variations of a tree species sampled from just a single object. Instead of duplicating a GrowFX object and selecting a new seed value, just animate the seed and let Forest Pack do the selecting for you. This has distinct advantages. Imagine that I'd created a plant and I wanted 20 variations. First of all, it would be a slow process to clone and reseed the plant model 20 times, but it also means if I want to change the rule set that drives the GrowFX object, I'd have to do all of this again because the changes won't cascade through my cloned versions. That's an inefficient way to work, so let's prepare our trees in the sample scene. So if we look at the start render, we can see that we're only scattering a single model, and again the repetition is very obvious. So to fix it, this procedure should be starting to become familiar. Select the Aspen model, turn on auto key, move the playhead to frame 100, and then in the GrowFX object's main parameters rollout, just click the new seed button. And then turn off auto key. And now if you scrub the playhead, you should get a different tree variation for each frame. Finally, we need to update the forest object to take samples from this tree. So to do this, select the Forest Pack Trees object, open its animation rollout and activate random samples. Set the time offset value to 1 and the count to 10. The cool thing is we can easily choose how many tree variations we need just with this value. 20 trees? No problem, just update the count. That's too many? Just set it back to 10. Finally, let's add some transform variation too. Turn on rotation and accept the default values. And turn on scale, and we'll create some smaller trees by setting the minimum value to 60 and leaving the maximum value at 120. And if you render now, you'll see that there's substantially more variation in these tree models. But there is of course a drawback to this approach. It only works for still images. If you were to animate this scene, it would result in the trees, rocks and plants changing and jumping around on each frame as their seed values animate throughout the render. There is, however, a workaround using Forest Pack 5, as long as you don't need the scattered object itself to be animated. Let's use the final object in the scene, the ferns, as an example of this approach. So we'll select the ferns Forest Pack object, open the animation rollout and turn off animate only at render time, and then move the timeline. Even though we're in point cloud mode, you can see that the ferns are changing on each frame. So Forest Pack 5 has a new feature called Forest Effects that allows you to extend the functionality of the plugin by loading effects files. In this case, I can load an effects file that randomizes the samples just like we did with the trees, but stops them from animating from frame to frame. And to use it, you just have to configure the animation settings slightly differently. So open the animation rollout and change the mode this time to frame from map. Unlike the other three modes, this prevents the animation from automatically playing to to follow the source object. It's intended for use when you want to control an object's animation with a grayscale map, but in this case we're going to randomize those samples instead to create something similar to the random samples mode, but with the advantage of holding the same model from frame to frame. Frame from map mode uses two parameters to define the range of frames to be sampled. Set the start frame to 0 and the end frame to 9 to capture 10 different versions of the fern models. Remember, we're actually scattering 2 fern models, so that's going to be 20 samples in total. Now for the new bit, open the new effects rollout, only available in Forest Pack 5, and click on the edit button to open the effects editor. We'll be loading a pre-made effect, so you don't need to worry too much about this interface for now. Click on the import button and select the FFX lock animation frames EFF file from the downloads for this tutorial. The effects script will load into the editor, and as you can see, it's a nice simple one. Just click OK to run the script, and in the effects rollout you'll have a new parameter. This value needs to be set to match the number of samples created by the frame from map settings. Remember, we're sampling frames 0 to 9 in this example, and that's 10 samples in total, so set the number sample value to 10. And now, if I scrub the timeline, you'll see that the forest object remains unchanged from frame to frame. But if you toggle the animation on and off, you'll see that the samples are indeed still randomized. And to finish up, I want to mention a quick tip to help speed up render times. You may find that some procedural objects take a little time to build. For example, if I reselect the Aspen model and turn on GrowFX MetaMesh feature so that the trunk and first level of branches seamlessly blend, the object looks much better, but the build time for each frame is considerably longer. This can delay renders starting because Forest Pack must wait for each sample to build to create its animation cache. A solution is to write out the animations to proxies, which generally load much faster than a complex GrowFX model will build. For example, if you did want to use a MetaMesh trunk for the Aspen tree models, you could do this. Select the GrowFX model and turn on MetaMesh. If you want to export this to a proxy, you'll also need to turn on Convert to Mesh. Right-click on the object and select the Save as Proxy option for your chosen renderer. Here I'm using V-Ray, so I'll select V-Ray Mesh Export, and I'm going to change these settings. I want to export each selected object in a separate file. There's only one object, but this preserves the pivot points. I'm going to tick to export the animation and change the drop down to frame range. I'm going to set the start frame to 0, and even though I'm only using 10 models in this scene, I'm going to export 20 so that I can increase the number of variations if I need them. And that's it, just click OK and wait while the object saves out. I'm sure you don't want to watch this whole process, so I'm going to pause the video and wait until it's finished. Now once the proxy's been created, you can now disable the GrowFX object. I'm going to keep it in the scene so that it's easy to make changes if necessary. Now we'll load the proxy back in, so go to Create V-Ray and select V-Ray Proxy. Click in the scene to place the object and load the Aspen VR Mesh exported a minute ago. And you'll now have a proxy version of your GrowFX animation in the scene. You can then select FP Trees, open the geometry rollout, and replace the GrowFX object with the proxy. You'll find now that renders start much faster than when Forest was having to sample the procedural objects every time. And also, this is still convenient if you want to edit the GrowFX object. All you need to do is make your changes, resave the VR Mesh file, and everything updates automatically. And that concludes this tutorial in which we looked at an easy way to randomize and manage variations of objects using Forest Pack's animation controls. We also touched upon a number of different areas that you might be interested to explore further. If you'd like to know more about animation controls, then we have an Animating with Forest Pack tutorial that covers them in a lot of detail. If you'd like to know more about forest color, then you can check out the Autumn Park tutorial. And finally, for a more in-depth look at transform randomization, I recommend checking out Modern Barns. We also have documentation for the new Forest Effects feature, and we'll be releasing more tutorials about that very soon. Until then, stay tuned for future training, or for more information about many aspects of Forest Pack's features, please see our reference section, the forum, or visit the tutorials page for even more tips and tricks and in-depth tutorials.